Hello, everyone. Welcome in on this Monday, September 16, 2024. We had an amazing week, too. We've got one more game tonight that I'm really interested in seeing how it plays out. The Eagles versus the Falcons. I feel like roster-wise, they're kind of in similar situations where I trust the roster. I'm just not sure about the coaching long-term. We'll get into that a little bit more towards the end. But right now, I want to start with C.J. Stroud, the Bears, the Texans, that primetime game last night, because I don't want to overreact to what I saw. But if you go off what we've seen these first 2 weeks in the season, I know Lamar's not playing his best football right now, even though he's not playing terrible. And I know Mahomes has had a really weird first 2 weeks of the year. He feels like a Tom Brady now to me. Like, you're not going to see Mahomes' best football in the regular season anymore. You're just not. He's not that kind of player. He's saving it for the postseason. He's not going to empty his bag of tricks. You haven't necessarily seen the best from a Jalen Hurts quite yet. We'll see how he plays tonight. Josh Allen, you saw amazing football from him. I'm not really worried about him. But C.J. Stroud right now looks like a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. He's playing absolutely lights out. And I don't want to over-exaggerate because in the offseason, I said I believe that C.J. Stroud is already a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. He's going to stay there. That's not a fluke. What happened at the end of last season is not a Trevor Lawrence type situation where he made it to the playoffs and then he fell off a cliff. Trevor Lawrence now is nowhere to be found. He hasn't won a game in his last 7 starts, and they've paid him $55 million a year. I don't know what's going on in Jacksonville, but that's a weird situation. C.J. Stroud looks better in year 2, and that's important for a story that I've got later in this show regarding Bryce Young. But to me, C.J. Stroud is playing the quarterback position, like a top 5 quarterback right now. He's playing lights out. The throws that he makes, I haven't seen those throws since a Tom Brady. I haven't seen those throws since maybe a second-year Joe Burrow. And Joe played really well yesterday, obviously, and I think he outplayed Patrick Mahomes, undeniably so. But I think it's safe to say, without exaggerating, that C.J. Stroud is already a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, and he is someone to look out for in the postseason. When you think of the guys who succeed in the postseason, who make it into the dance, it's Josh Allen, it's Lamar Jackson, it's Joe Burrow, it's Patrick Mahomes. And even though those guys seem to fall off a cliff when they face a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, when you think of the quarterbacks that can actually perform in the postseason and that are good enough to go on a crazy run or a heater and lead their team into the postseason and that you can feel confident in, I think it's the Houston Texans. I think they're an excellent underdog story. I think I don't think enough people are paying attention to them and what they've got going on. Now, obviously, a huge loss yesterday with Joe Mixon going out due to injury. They need that run game because it makes them a more balanced team. But they have so many weapons, an overwhelming amount of weapons. He has worked so well with Stephon Diggs in a way that I don't think many people expected. I was kind of on the fence. I was like, it'll probably work, but I can see a world in which it doesn't. That team looks excellent right now. That defense, that secondary, first of all, they do a great job of getting after the passer. The Bears' offensive line is not terrible, so that was a good test for them. They went up against the Colts last week, and they looked good against them. That Houston Texans defense under D'Amico Ryan, was there ever a doubt? They've got an excellent pass rush. They've got an arguably even more dangerous secondary, and they have C.J. Stroud with a ton of weapons on the other side of the football. This is a team that can compete in the postseason, and people should be looking out for in the AFC playoff picture. They are in my Super Bowl bubble, not close to the center of that bubble where the Kansas City Chiefs are and the 49ers are and the Lions are, but maybe on that outside rim of my Super Bowl bubble. With that being said, I want to move on to Caleb Williams because he did not have the best outing yesterday. Caleb Williams finished with 174 passing yards, 0 touchdowns. He was sacked 7 times. Once again, you try not to overreact to things. It's week 2, especially in this kind of situation. You're dealing with a first-year quarterback who's only played now 2 games of regular season NFL football. That's against complex schemes and not soft coverage like he saw in preseason. I think with Caleb, it is important to remember more than ever in a situation like Caleb's, he is a first-year guy, and I don't think he performed well yesterday. I think Caleb started the game better than he finished it last week. Last week, it felt like he kind of came into his own, but overall, his performance was a D. The only reason I didn't give him an F was because he didn't turn the ball over. This week, he turned the ball over twice. That is a massive no-no for me. I want these quarterbacks to learn, and I understand that they're going to make mistakes, but Caleb Williams playing hero ball again in the second half after he played so well in the first half and was able to play the quarterback position was just so disappointing from a fan who just wants to see him succeed's perspective. I wanted Caleb to play like he played in that first quarter and that first half. I don't mind if there's not big-time plays. I just want you to learn and get comfortable with the quarterback position in the NFL, which is also acknowledging the reality of the situation that you're not going to be a great quarterback and you're not going to be the hero on every play. Caleb went back to his USC ways in the second half, specifically in the fourth quarter on that throw where he rolled out to the right. He escaped pressure, made an incredible move. First half of that clip looks like it's going to be a highlight for the ages, and then he throws it into triple coverage and it gets picked off. Those are the kind of plays that Caleb Williams cannot make in the NFL. He really didn't get away with them in his senior year, or really didn't get away with them his last year at USC the way that he did in his Heisman year the year before. But Caleb is simply going to have to play better and be more refined. And he played really well in the first half, and I thought he was clean. But in the second half, things kind of went off the rails. And you could say, Ben, well, that's because he felt like he had to get back in control of the game, and he felt like he had to will the Bears back to a win. The Bears have enough talent and are well coached enough on both offense and defense, and they have the right amount of personnel that the big plays are going to come, but you can't force them. That's what I felt like Caleb Williams was doing yesterday. I think he'll get better. But yeah, that was really bad. Chiefs-Bengals, what a game. Everybody this morning in the entire world and their mother is saying, oh, the Chiefs have to be careful because the Bengals outplayed them. Whenever somebody says that, and people are saying this morning, the Bengals outplayed the Chiefs, and that's the reason why the Chiefs should be worried, no, that's the reason why the Bengals and the rest of the NFL should be worried, in my opinion, because the Chiefs had only 17 receiving yards from Xavier Worthy in this game. Travis Kelce, through 2 weeks of the year, has been absolutely dormant. He's been a no-show, has less than 40 yards receiving. Patrick Mahomes had only 150 passing yards yesterday and had 2 picks. You think that offense is going to look that bad in the postseason? You are expecting and banking on the fact that Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Spags are not going to be even better prepared in the postseason than they are in week 2 of the regular season? This is the time to beat the Kansas City Chiefs, not later on. When I hear Bengals fans this morning and people on TV saying the Bengals absolutely outplayed them, it should worry the Bengals that they outplayed the Chiefs and they still couldn't find a way to win. They still lost. And it came down to a team effort. The Chiefs' defense was excellent. Their kicker, Harrison Butker, was excellent, obviously. He's one of the best kickers in the league. But if you are using yesterday as an excuse and that PI call as, oh, the Bengals lost and the Chiefs got bailed out by the refs and the Bengals outplayed the Chiefs and they're going to win next time, that is not indicative of a good recipe. Oh, we outplayed you guys and we still lost. Well, what happens when the Kansas City Chiefs inevitably outplay you in the postseason? Because the Kansas City Chiefs have not been outplayed in a postseason game in a while now. It feels like it's probably been 2 years. The last time the Kansas City Chiefs got outplayed, you could say, in the Super Bowl or in the last time you could say the Kansas City Chiefs got outplayed in a postseason game was in the Super Bowl 2 years ago against the Eagles when Jalen Hurts went off, and what was the end result of that game? So if you're claiming as a team, oh, well, we outplayed the Kansas City Chiefs, and you're going to hang your hat on that, congratulations. Do you think you're going to outplay them in the postseason? Probably not. And do you think that if you do outplay them, you're going to win? Probably not, because the Kansas City Chiefs are a better situational football team, and Patrick Mahomes is never going to blow you out of the stadium when it comes to a lead. These games are always close when it comes to Patrick, but he is like Tom Brady. If he gets the ball in the last 2 minutes of the game, or he has to lead you downfield to put you in a position to win or score a field goal, he is going to do it. I have more faith in the fact that Patrick Mahomes is going to be Patrick Mahomes in the last 2 minutes of any game than I do in other teams outplaying the Kansas City Chiefs and beating them in the regular season and the postseason. And I think this is where the evolution of sports gambling becoming popular in the NFL has sort of become a little bit of a problem, because now broadcasting in general, and you can tell, like DraftKings and mainstream media and shows, and I don't want to get too conspiratorial here, feel the need to hype up these other teams. Oh, the Ravens are going to be a great team. The Bengals are going to be a great team. The 49ers are going to be a great team. They absolutely are. Nobody's denying that. But if you genuinely believe that the Kansas City Chiefs, who last year you could argue had, over the last 2 years, have had the worst receiving core in the NFL, are now better on offense when they have Patrick Mahomes under center and their defense looks somehow even better than it did last year, even though they lost a guy in free agency who was so important to that team, to the Titans, whose name slips my mind, you're delusional. This Kansas City Chiefs team is excellent. They are going to three-peat, in my opinion, and I know it seems like we're only 2 weeks into the year and I might be over-exaggerating, but that team is so complete that I just don't see how they lose in the postseason. This is going to be I'm not saying it's going to be a cakewalk. They're going to make it into the postseason, and they're going to dominate once again. That's just my take on it. Now, as of this morning, Isaiah Pacheco fractured his fibula. He's going to miss some time. That's important. The Chiefs will look less immortal and more mortal in this case over the next few weeks, because they're going to have a massive part of their run game and a massive part of their offense missing from the equation. But once he's healthy again, in about 6 weeks, I would give it some time. I'd purposely rest him a little longer than you need to, because he is so important to that offense. They're going to be in a great position to win and figure things out, and I think they're going to win their division, even though I am so happy and so excited about another team in that same division. Let's move on to Jim Harbaugh and this Chargers team because, man, everybody in the offseason told me, Ben, why do you think the Chargers are a playoff team? Why do you think that Jim Harbaugh is just going to change this team around in year one? They have no receiving core. Jim Harbaugh's identity is changing teams overnight. It's what he has done at every stop in the NFL and in college. At Stanford, at Michigan, in the NFL with the 49ers, he's always figured out a way to turn things around immediately. He did it with the Chargers, and everybody expected him to, or at least I did. I'm not sure why you guys didn't. And to me, it could not have been more obvious that this Chargers team was going to be on a tremendous come-up, even if their personnel or their receivers weren't the sexiest or the flashiest group, or they weren't stars. They had a lot of drops last year, or you feel like they're missing some weapons. Justin Herbert, a top 6 quarterback in the NFL, with Jim Harbaugh, who's a top 5 or 6 coach in the league. Yeah, I think they're going to be just fine in 2024 in a quarterback-driven league with their culture and Jim Harbaugh's culture, which is built on team and toughness. That team is going to be very dangerous, and even though they're in the AFC West, I think I said the Chiefs were in the AFC East. I misspoke a few minutes ago. But even if they're in the AFC West with a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, I still think this Jim Harbaugh-led Chargers team can make some noise, and they should be considered a looming threat in the AFC. They're going to come out of nowhere is what it feels like because people are still underestimating them somehow. Jim Harbaugh has turned around this team overnight just like I said he would, and yeah, another thing I was right about in the offseason. Another team that I was right about in the offseason I feel like was the Jets. I believe the Jets are going to win the AFC East. And this weekend showed you, even though a lot of fans are overreacting to a 1 o'clock game that I watched essentially the entirety of, I was switching back and forth between that one and the Cowboys game. When you watch the Jets, I told you, the Jets last year with their defense and their offensive weapons, they won a lot of games in an ugly way. They know how to win ugly, unfortunately, because of injuries last year and because of 2 years of Zach Wilson. They know, and they have a culture, and they have the skill set. I believe it's a skill to win these close games. The Jets have that skill set after 2 years with Zach Wilson and years of winning ugly. They know how to win ugly. Now with Aaron Rodgers, who is a good facilitator of the football, if nothing else, at this point in his career, they are going to win football games. And even if they're ugly and they're not as flashy as people want them to look because they're a New York team and because Aaron Rodgers is in the lead, that is a team that knows how to win ugly, that is going to win ugly, and last year won 7 games in an ugly fashion. They're going to be just fine this year. Titans are an underratedly tough team. They've got a great defense. They've got a boneheaded quarterback who I'll talk about in a second. But yeah, I'm not worried about the Jets. I told you, I thought the Jets would win the AFC East, and I still told you that I thought, in spite of that, I thought Aaron Rodgers would not look like a top 15 quarterback, or he would play at around a level of 15 or 16 in terms of quarterback production. Aaron Rodgers right now is playing like the 15th best quarterback in the league. He's not playing top 10. He's not playing top 5, just as I said in the offseason. But it is enough with that Jets team and that personnel and that defense and those weapons to win games. And even though it's not flashy and it's not exciting and it's not like the Saints wins through the first 2 weeks of the year against the Panthers and the Cowboys, they are still wins in the schedule. And I think this Jets team, with a very easy schedule, they've got the 4th easiest schedule in the league according to Sharp Analysis. They're going to be just fine. I'm not worried about the Jets. I knew Aaron wasn't going to be the show-stopping player that everybody expected him to be. He hadn't played a snap of real football in over 500 days. I wasn't expecting Aaron Rodgers at 40 years of age to be Tom Brady with the Bucs. That's not what this was going to be. I told you that in the offseason, but it is still good enough to lead this Jets team to wins, even if those wins are ugly. The schedule doesn't say this was a great win, this one was highlight worthy, this one's going to make onto TikTok in terms of like a highlight reel. It just says win, W or loss. They've got a W on the schedule. They're going to be just fine. I am not worried about this Jets team. They're going to do all right. Will Levis. Will Levis might unintentionally be the funniest player in the NFL. He has made such bad decisions, and if I was a Titans fan, I would not be laughing right now. I would be crying. Brian Callahan, who is the offensive-minded head coach of the Titans, normally I would say as a head coach, you have to support your quarterback. You have to make him feel, especially a young quarterback, you have to make your young quarterback feel supported, and you have to make him confident in himself the way that Mike McDaniel does with Tua. But Brian Callahan's response what the F are you doing, screaming at Will Levis after he tried to escape the pocket, was playing hopscotch over like a linebacker, a defensive lineman, and then decides to shovel pass it backwards. That was an absolute warranted response. If I was Brian Callahan, I would have also ripped into Will Levis in that moment. And Will Levis right now is playing like the worst starting quarterback in the NFL. He just doesn't have good decision making, and he's made 2 massive boneheaded plays through 2 weeks. And the images, him falling to his knees after throwing that pick, him just literally running backwards, falling, tripping like a little kid, like running away in a grocery store or like with a phone. Like, you've seen those memes before. Will Levis just looks all out of sorts, and I'm a little bit sad because I thought Will Levis would be better than he has ended up being in the NFL when I talked about him 2 years ago on this show coming into the league, but he simply hasn't panned out. He's not a good decision maker. He has to play cleaner football, and he cannot make decisions that put his team in a position to lose games in the second quarter. You can't win a game in the first half. You can't win the game in the second quarter, but you can lose in the second quarter, and you can't lose in the first half if you make decisions that put your team out of scoring position, and essentially, in this case, 3 and 6 point swings. It's been an absolute disaster. I think the Titans have a little bit of a shit show on their hands, and I hope for their sake they figure it out because they've got a great culture and really cool uniforms. But yeah, in that division with the Colts, with the Texans, I just don't see where the Titans fit in. This is going to be a bust of a year for them. I don't see any bright spot whatsoever. I want to talk about now, okay, so this is a more serious subject. Tua. Last Thursday, we only have shows on Monday, so I rarely talk about Thursday Night Football, but we've got to. This morning, there are reports that Tua is going to meet with neurologists and that he, quote, has no plans to retire. You cannot help somebody who does not want to be helped. I remember a few years ago, Rogan had a fighter on his podcast, and that fighter was, I forget the name of the fighter, but he made a really good point that he felt like as he got older, he sort of developed a glass chin because what he thought, the reasoning was, if you get knocked out as a fighter or you get knocked out in football, it's essentially your brain trying to protect you. If you continuously get hit in your head, your brain is going to try to protect you by shutting off. Your head, your skull, your brain does not become more tolerant of knockout punches or of knockout hits as you get older or as you get hit more. Tua has now had devastating concussions on primetime games, more so than any other player I think we've ever seen. We've seen players get knocked out. We've seen the vicious "here comes the boom" edits. I literally grew up on them on YouTube, and now kids get to see them on TikTok all the time. But when you watch Tua with the fencing hands or those hands that almost look like he's having a stroke or like he has a condition, you don't want to speculate, right? And I'm not a doctor, but that is not a good sign or a good look for Tua. If I was Tua, I take the $93 million guaranteed and I walk away from this game. People are going to say, but Ben, he didn't walk away from the game 2 years ago. Things are different now for Tua. 2 years ago, Tua was not married. 2 years ago, Tua didn't have 2 children. Tua didn't have children. Now, 2 years later, Tua has a wife, Tua is married, Tua has children, Tua has a family, and Tua also has a contract. He was on his rookie contract 2 years ago. I understand to a certain extent why he didn't walk away. He was trying to look for the generational bag and making sure that he would secure that generational bag. He now has the ability to walk away with $93 million fully guaranteed if he decides that football is simply no longer for him and he can no longer give the sport what it deserves. There is a possibility that he could get $167 million in injury guarantees, although that is less likely because you would have to be on the active roster for the full duration of that contract. It seems more likely that if Tua retired, he would get $93 million, no questions asked. I think Tua, as great of a competitor as he is, needs to definitely consider walking away. As for Tua and the reports that say he has, quote, no plans to retire, you cannot help someone who needs to be helped. I hope that someone in his agency, someone who represents him, someone in his family, and Mike McDaniel, and maybe somebody who's in a position that's close enough to him can tell him, you seriously need to consider walking away from the game for your own well-being, because football is amazing, but football is not going to be there for the rest of your life on the field. It will be if you become an analyst. I think Tua could walk away from the game with the health that he has remaining, plenty of life still ahead of him, has beautiful kids, has a wife now. I think he would instantly get a job on a college game day or on an SEC network, which pays very well, would get paid a couple $1 million a year, if anything, could develop his own brand beyond football, could coach, has so many different things that he could do, but staying on the field and saying, I want to take more hits and I feel like I still have more to give the game, it's a little bit stubborn, it's quite frankly dangerous, and I think someone should seriously implore Tua to maybe take a step back. Okay, so let's talk about the Saints-Cowboys game. Everybody wants to tell you, everybody wants to clown the Cowboys this morning, but to me, that's really not the story. The Saints are now in a position where they might be one of the biggest juggernauts in the NFL that we didn't see coming. Every single offseason, there is a team that nobody talks about because we write off their coaches, or we write off the quarterback, or we say they're not talented enough, or they're in a weird division, or they're just a wonky team, or those guys are old and injured, and we simply overlook teams. If we look back at this offseason, the Saints are probably the team that comes to mind in those situations. To me, the Saints' defensive-minded head coach and their new offensive coordinator with Derek Carr, who I said 2 years ago on this show when I first started, I wasn't the biggest Derek Carr fan in the world, but I thought he was a top 14 quarterback in the NFL. Derek Carr is playing excellent football right now, and the Saints are playing lethal football offensively by incorporating the play-action pass game and the play-action pass schemes that you see the 49ers and the Lions run. They are doing amazing right now. They've always had a great defense. That's never been a worry of mine, but it just looks a lot better on tape now because they can get turnovers, they can force the offense to be the opposing offense to be uncomfortable, and they can score points offensively because Alvin Kamara right now looks like what he used to look like, which is a top 3 running back in the NFL behind maybe Christian McCaffrey and Saquon, who right now Christian McCaffrey is going to be out for several weeks. Alvin Kamara could be the best. You could say that Alvin Kamara right now is the best running back in the NFL, and that wouldn't be an exaggeration through the first 2 weeks of the year. This Saints team is incredibly underrated. They're in a division that, you know what? I looked at the Falcons, and I said the Falcons are the best team in the NFC South. I looked at the Bucs, and I would have said they had the best roster in the NFC South. Right now, both things may be true. Both of those statements, best team and best roster. For the Saints, we just didn't see it coming. I'm super happy for them. I think they're a great story. I can't wait to see if this is sustainable and they can keep it up. Obviously, week 1 against the Panthers, week 2 against the Cowboys, who we've always assumed are a bit fraudulent, even though they perform really well in the regular season. I can't wait to see how it plays out, but I'm super happy for Derek Carr. I'm super happy for the Saints, and it feels like the Saints might actually be a weapon that is coming up on the heels of these other great NFC teams in general. I do want to talk about this, though. The Cowboys. Let's pivot now to the Cowboys, and then I want to talk some college football as well. It's a packed show today. I get it. I think when you look at the Cowboys, what have I always said about Micah Parsons? In the offseason, when they were talking, in the offseason when fans were debating, do you pay CeeDee Lamb, do you pay Dak Prescott, do you pay Micah Parsons, do you get rid of all 3, or which combination do you keep? My methodology was, I think Dak is a really good regular season quarterback. He's proven that. He's a top 12, top 13 quarterback in the NFL overall, I think, if you include the postseason. He's top 5 or 6 in the regular season, but in the postseason, including that, which is the most important part of the year, I wouldn't say he's top 10. You need to pay Dak. You need to pay his lead weapon. You can't get rid of his lead weapon if you're going to pay Dak to stay long-term. So you have to pay Dak and CeeDee, and I thought the odd man out there would be Micah Parsons, and I told you I didn't necessarily think that was a terrible combination because, in my opinion, Micah Parsons, even though he's an amazing regular season player, coincidentally, Micah Parsons' worst games and the games where he fails to show up and perform are the biggest games of the year. I have also told you this. I feel like Micah Parsons is a little bit smaller as a pass rusher. That's not an opinion. That is an observation. He looked small yesterday against the Saints. The Saints dominated him. The Saints bullied him. The Saints made him a non-factor in that game. Great offensive lines will do that, and great offensive lines are usually the catalyst for great teams in the postseason, which the Cowboys will have to face if they have any intention of making it to the playoffs this year. To me, it wasn't a big game per se, but Micah Parsons was missing in action. And to me, that is why I said in the offseason, Micah's a little smaller than I'd like him to be. And if there's an odd man out that doesn't get paid by Jerry this offseason or this season or in the next year by Jerry Jones, it would probably be Micah Parsons because you're not going to get rid of Dak after the season that he had last year. You can't afford to let Dak's number 1 wide receiver 1 walk out the door or trade him somewhere else. You have to re-sign his best weapon, and his only weapon right now is what it feels like if you watch the Cowboys. That means that Micah Parsons, who has performed really well in the regular season, is one of the best pass rushers in the league. Yes, all these things are true, but has also come up short in the biggest moments of the year and looks small against really good offensive lines. That's a concern for me. He showed it this weekend. I think this is a normal observation to make. I don't think I'm throwing him under the bus there. I think everybody saw it this weekend. Yeah, Micah Parsons, he's not a perfect player. There are certain things that I have pointed out that came to fruition this weekend. Last thing here. Arch Manning is Texas's QB1. If you watch Arch Manning on Saturday, he's not giving that job back to Quinn Ewers. I know they put out a statement saying that Quinn Ewers is going to be back and he's going to be feeling healthy pretty soon and that the injury wasn't as bad as they thought and he should be back after maybe next week, maybe 2 weeks tops. Arch Manning is not going to let go of that Texas QB1 starting job. He is going to remain the starter in Texas. Arch Manning, I talked about him 2 weeks ago on this show. If you thought that Arch Manning wasn't going to be a great NFL quarterback, I cannot help you. Arch Manning has already proven through just a few limited snaps that we've seen him and the action, he can play ball. He's an amazing decision maker. He has a great set of wheels. He is the most athletic Manning of all time. Arch Manning, you see the way that sideline reacts. You see the way that Sark calls plays. I know Quinn Ewers is great. I know Quinn Ewers was a literal NFL lottery projected pick at the end of this year. I'm not saying Quinn Ewers is a bum, but when you see what you have in Arch Manning and you understand the magnitude of the moment and everybody in that stadium felt it, you are watching another Manning play football, and not just any Manning, but arguably the most talented and the most athletic Manning of all time. You can't put that guy back on the bench. To me, Arch Manning is going to stay as QB1, rightfully so. He had an amazing game. He was lights out, had 5 or 6 touchdowns, one with his legs, the rest with his arm. He's a great quarterback. I cannot wait to see Arch Manning in the NFL one day, and I cannot imagine a future where Arch Manning is suiting up on Monday Night Football in the NFL, and you tune into ESPN2 to watch Peyton and Eli break down his game live on the Manning Cast. To me, this is going to be one of the most incredible, most movie-like sequences in the NFL over the next few years. I think Arch Manning's going to be a great player. I say you keep him as QB1. I think Quinn's time is done in Texas. I would assume he transfers after this year or declares for the draft. We'll see. With that being said, that is all for this week's show. I think we've got a great game tonight. I would pick the Eagles because I have more confidence in their quarterback. Kirk Cousins looks a little rusty after last week. It's only 1 week, but that remains to be seen. I'm running out of time here on this recording, but thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. I'll see you next week. We've got an excellent week 3 on slate. I cannot wait. I'll see you next week.